The throne room went silent the moment King Cade Ashford opened his mouth, and Ren Calder felt that silence settle over her skin like cold water. She was sitting exactly where she always sat, on the smaller chair beside his massive one, wearing the deep green dress the seamstresses had made for her only that morning. She had smiled at herself in the mirror an hour ago. She would not smile again for a long time. The Southern Pax will not stand with us unless the bond is sealed properly, Cade said, and his voice carried across the hall the way it always did, deep and certain, a voice built for command. For the safety of every wolf in this kingdom, I will take Isolda Reyes as a second queen. Nobody gasped. That was the strange part. 300 pack members, elders, warriors, and servants stood in that hall, and not one of them gasped, because not one of them was surprised. Ren understood then that she was the last person in the room to know. Her hand stayed folded in her lap. Her spine stayed straight. Years of training had taught her how to hold a room's gaze without giving anything away, and she used every bit of it now, because the alternative was breaking apart in front of 300 witnesses who already seemed to expect it. Isolda Reyes stood near the front of the hall in deep red silk, her chin lifted, her eyes bright with a kind of victory she did not bother to hide. She looked at Ren the way a hunter looks at something already caught. Cade still had not looked at his wife. Not once. The elders began to murmur, low approving sounds, talk of strength and alliance, and the future of the kingdom. Ren heard none of the words clearly. She heard only the rhythm of her own heartbeat, steady, too steady, the kind of steady a person forces when they refuse to let their body betray them. Her wolf, usually so loud inside her chest, so quick to growl or whine or pace when something felt wrong, went completely still, not hiding, waiting, as if some part of her, wiser than the rest, already knew that whatever came next would need every ounce of quiet strength she had. "My Luna," Cade said, finally turning toward her, "understands the importance of this union." It was not a question. He said it like a fact already settled, like something he expected her to nod along to, simply because he had spoken it aloud. Ren looked at him, really looked. This was the man she had bonded with 3 years ago on a training field, back when she was 19 and terrified, and he had looked at her like she was the only steady thing in a shifting world. This was the man who once sat by her side through 3 sleepless nights when fever nearly took her, who had once told her, quietly, that he would burn the kingdom down before he let anyone take her from him. That man was gone from his own eyes right now. In his place stood a king solving a political problem, and she happened to be sitting in the middle of it. She smiled. It was not a real smile, but it looked enough like one to fool a room full of people who had already decided not to look too closely. "Of course," she said, and her voice did not shake, which surprised her more than anyone. "The kingdom comes first." A ripple of approval moved through the hall. Isolda's smile widened. Cade exhaled, some tension leaving his shoulders, as if her 3 simple words had solved everything for him. He had no idea what those words had actually cost her. The rest of the ceremony passed in pieces. Ren heard herself agree to a toast. She watched wine poured into glasses meant to celebrate an arrangement that would end her marriage in every way that mattered, while keeping her trapped inside its shape. She watched Isolda step closer to Cade, watched his hand rest briefly at the small of her back to guide her toward the head table, a gesture so natural it must have already happened many times before tonight. Nobody in that hall seemed to notice that the true Luna, the one who had bled for this pack, fought for this pack, buried 2 younger warriors with her own hands and never once flinched, was standing perfectly still at the edge of her own life, watching it get rearranged without her permission. She excused herself before the toast could be raised in her name. Nobody stopped her. That told her everything she needed to know about how this was going to go. The hallway outside the throne room was cooler, quieter, lined with old portraits of Ashford kings and their queens, generation after generation of matched pairs who had apparently understood the rules of this life far better than she had. She walked past them slowly, her hand trailing along the stone wall, feeling for the first time in years like a stranger inside her own home. Beta Raina Voss found her there, arms crossed, eyes soft with worry, that Ren did not want and could not accept right now, because accepting it might mean falling apart. Ren, Raina's voice was gentle, the way it always was when trouble was close. Talk to me. There's nothing to talk about. Ren kept walking. He made his announcement. Everyone approved. That's how these things work. That's not how marriage is supposed to work. Raina fell into step beside her, matching her pace easily, the way she had done since they were pups together running wild through these same halls. You didn't agree to this. I was standing right there. Nobody asked you. He asked me to accept it. That's close enough for a king. Ren's voice came out flatter than she intended, and she saw the way Raina flinched at the sound of it. I said the kingdom comes first. That's what a good Luna says. You're not just a good Luna. You're his mate. Raina caught her arm, gently, stopping her in the middle of the hallway. There's a difference, and he seems to have forgotten it. Ren looked down at Raina's hand on her arm, then up at her friend's face, and for one dangerous moment, she nearly let the mask crack. She nearly let herself say what she was truly feeling, the fear crawling under her calm, the anger she had not yet let herself name, the grief for a bond she thought would last forever, and now understood was only as strong as political convenience allowed it to be. Instead, she took a slow breath and put the mask back into place. I need to think, she said quietly. Alone, if that's all right. Raina searched her face for a long moment, clearly unconvinced, but she let go of Ren's arm anyway. I'm here. Whatever you need, you know that. I know. Ren managed something close to a real smile this time, small and tired. Thank you. She continued down the hallway alone, her footsteps echoing off stone that had witnessed hundreds of years of Ashford history, and somewhere behind her, faint through the heavy doors, she could hear the celebration continuing without her, as if her absence changed nothing at all. Maybe it didn't, not yet. Her feet carried her, without any real decision on her part, toward the old archive wing of the castle, a place few people bothered visiting anymore, except historians and the occasional curious pup looking for old battle stories. It was quiet there, dusty, lit only by a few flickering candles the night staff kept burning out of habit. She did not fully understand why she was heading there until she was already standing in front of the oldest shelf, her fingers trailing along cracked leather spines that had not been touched in decades. Some instinct older than her conscious mind was pulling her toward the deepest history of her kingdom, toward the laws and customs written before convenience became more important than loyalty. She pulled down a heavy volume, its pages yellowed and brittle, and sat at the small reading table in the corner, candlelight flickering across words written by hands long since turned to dust. Somewhere behind her, in a throne room glowing with celebration, her husband was toasting to a future that no longer included her as anything more than a formality. Somewhere inside her chest, something small and stubborn refused to accept that as the end of her story. She turned another page and kept reading. Outside the archive window, dawn still felt very far away. She had no idea yet how much would change before it arrived. For now there was only the candlelight, the old pages, and the quiet, growing certainty that if nobody else in that castle was going to fight for her place in this world, she would simply have to find another way to claim one for herself. The celebration lasted long into the night. Laughter drifted faintly down empty corridors, glasses clinked somewhere far above her, and every now and then she heard Isolda's bright, confident voice rising above the rest, already speaking as though the castle belonged to her. Ren did not go back. She sat with the old book, tracing lines of faded ink with careful fingers, reading about bonds and blood, and choices made long before anyone thought to ask a Luna what she actually wanted. She did not cry. She told herself that mattered, though she was not entirely sure why. By the time the candle burned low, she had read enough to know two things clearly. The first was that everyone in that throne room believed her heartbreak was already finished, folded neatly away, no longer worth watching. The second was that they were wrong, and dawn would prove it. The book Ren had chosen was called simply The Old Bonds, and its cover had cracked so badly that flakes of leather came away on her fingertips as she turned the pages. It was not written for queens or kings. It was written for scholars, in dense old script, and she had to read each line twice before the meaning settled properly in her mind. Most of it was useless to her. Pages about naming ceremonies, pages about border markers, pages about long-forgotten treaties between pacts that no longer existed. She almost closed the book twice, ready to accept that there was nothing here for her, nothing that could undo what had been announced in the throne room that night. Then she found the chapter titled Severance, and her fingers stopped moving entirely. According to the old text, a mating bond was not always permanent, not in the way every young wolf was raised to believe. In ancient times, before kings began treating marriages like trade agreements, a Luna who had been wronged by her mate could sever the bond herself, using her own blood at the border shrine where the first Ashford pack had made its founding promise to the land. The text called it an act of last resort, meant only for the gravest betrayals, when a mate had broken faith so completely that the bond itself had become a lie. Ren read the passage 3 times, her heart beating hard and slow, like a drum marking time before a battle. She was not naive enough to think Cade's announcement counted as the kind of betrayal the old text described, not by the letter of ancient law. He had not struck her. He had not abandoned her outright. He had simply decided, quietly, without her, that she would now share her life and her title with another woman, and expected her gratitude for being informed at all. But the text also said something else, something that caught in her chest like a hook. It said the bond could only be severed if the Luna herself believed, fully and without doubt, that the love which created it no longer existed on both sides equally. She thought of Cade's eyes in the throne room, distant, already somewhere else, already planning a future built around someone new. She did not doubt anymore. That frightened her more than anything else that night. Raina found her again near midnight, this time carrying 2 cups of something warm that smelled faintly of honey and mint. She set one down in front of Ren without a word and settled into the chair across from her, glancing at the ancient book with open curiosity. "You've been down here for hours," Raina said. "The celebration ended a while ago. Cade asked where you were." Ren's hand tightened slightly around her cup. "What did you tell him?" "That you needed air." Raina studied her carefully, which was true enough, I suppose. "What are you reading?" Ren considered lying. It would have been easy, a simple excuse about old pack history, nothing worth mentioning. But Raina had been at her side since childhood, had shifted beside her during her very first hunt, had held her hand through nights when grief nearly swallowed her whole. Lying to her felt like one more small betrayal Ren did not have the strength to add to the pile. "I'm reading about the old laws," Ren said quietly, "about what a Luna can do when a bond has already broken, even if nobody else admits it yet." Raina went very still. "Ren, I'm not asking your permission." Ren's voice was gentle but firm, steadier than she expected it to be. "I'm telling you because you're my friend, and I don't want you finding out some other way." "Finding out what, exactly?" Raina leaned forward, worry sharpening her features. "What does that book say?" Ren turned the fragile page toward her, pointing to the passage about severance, watching Raina's eyes move quickly across the old script, widening slightly as she reached the end. "This is real?" Raina asked. "This isn't just some old story nobody actually did. According to this text, it happened at least twice in the kingdom's early history." Ren closed the book carefully, as though it might crumble entirely if handled too roughly. Both times, the Luna walked away afterward and was never seen in the castle again. The bond doesn't just weaken, it ends completely, on both sides. "And you're considering this?" Raina's voice was quiet now, careful. "Because of tonight." "I'm considering it because of 3 years of tonight." Something in Ren's chest finally cracked open, just slightly, just enough for the words to spill out before she could stop them. "Do you know he never once used the word love in that entire announcement? Not once. He talked about safety, about alliance, about the kingdom's future. He talked about me the way you'd talk about a treaty that needed updating. Raina reached across the table and took her hand, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. He's always been better at leading than at loving, Raina finally said. That doesn't mean he stopped caring about you. Maybe not. Ren looked down at their joined hands. But caring isn't enough to build a life around. Not when the person doing the caring keeps forgetting to include you in the decisions that shape it. They sat together in silence for a while, the candle between them burning lower, shadows stretching long across the dusty shelves. Somewhere above them, the castle had gone quiet at last, celebration finally giving way to sleep, though Ren doubted she would find any rest tonight. "What will you do?" Raina asked eventually. Ren looked at the old book again, at the passage still visible even with the pages closed, as though the words had burned themselves into her memory already. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know I can't sit at his side tomorrow and smile at Isolda Reyes like nothing happened. I know I can't spend the rest of my life being a queen in name only, while someone else becomes queen in every way that matters." "Then don't." Raina squeezed her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'll help you. Quietly, if that's what you need. You've never once let me fall when I needed you." "I won't let you fall either." Ren felt something loosen in her chest at those words, a small relief in the middle of so much uncertainty. "I need to copy this passage," she said, "before I put the book back. I don't want anyone else finding it and realizing what I might be planning." "I'll keep watch," Raina said immediately, already rising from her chair. "Take whatever time you need." Ren worked quickly, but carefully, copying the old words onto a scrap of parchment by candlelight, her handwriting steady, despite the trembling she still felt somewhere underneath her skin. When she finished, she returned the ancient book to its shelf exactly where she had found it, careful to leave no sign that anyone had disturbed it at all. Then she held the candle close to the original page for one long moment, watching the flame catch the edge of brittle paper, watching centuries of careful preservation curl into smoke and ash within seconds. It felt wrong, destroying something so old, but she could not risk anyone else discovering the same path she now intended to walk, especially not before she had walked far enough down it to be beyond stopping. Raina returned just as the last curl of smoke faded into the dusty air, glancing at the empty space on the shelf where the passage used to be, then at the folded parchment now tucked carefully into Ren's sleeve. "Nobody's coming," Raina said. "The halls are empty. Everyone's asleep, including him." "Good." Ren stood, smoothing her dress, feeling strangely calm now that a decision, even an unfinished one, had begun to take shape inside her. "I need to think clearly before I do anything else. Tonight was only the beginning of understanding what's possible. I still need to decide whether I actually want to walk that path." "And if you do," Raina asked quietly, "what happens to the pack? What happens to Cade once the bond is gone?" Ren paused at the archive door, considering the question seriously, because it deserved serious thought and not some easy answer born only from anger. "I don't know," she said finally, "but I know what happens to me if I stay silent and let this arrangement move forward as though I have no voice in my own life. I disappear a little more every single day, until eventually there's nothing left of me for anyone to notice missing at all." Raina nodded slowly, understanding settling over her features even as worry remained close behind it. "Then take whatever time you need to be certain. I'll be here." Ren walked back to her chambers alone that night, moving quietly through corridors lined with portraits of Ashford queens who had come before her, wondering how many of them had faced choices like this one, wondering how many had chosen differently than history remembered. Her chambers, when she reached them, felt strange in a way she could not quite name, familiar furniture and familiar walls suddenly holding an unfamiliar weight, as though the room itself understood that everything within it now belonged to a life she was quietly beginning to consider leaving behind. Cade was not there. She had not expected him to be, not after everything, but some small foolish part of her still noticed his absence like a bruise pressed too hard. She sat by the window instead, looking out over the sleeping castle grounds, the training fields where she had first met him all those years ago, the border forest beyond where an old shrine waited, patient and unbothered by the passage of centuries for whatever choice she eventually made. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the window instead, turning the folded parchment over in her hands again and again, watching the darkness slowly begin to soften toward morning, aware that whatever she decided in the coming days, some part of her had already changed permanently the moment she read those old, careful words about severance and blood and choices Aluna was allowed to make when love had quietly stopped being enough. Somewhere down the hall, Cade slept peacefully, unaware that his announcement had set something irreversible into motion. Dawn was still hours away, but for the first time since the throne room fell silent around her, Ren felt something steadier than grief settling into her chest. It was not peace, not yet. But it was the beginning of a plan, and a plan, she reminded herself quietly, was always better than simply waiting to be forgotten. Morning arrived with a brightness that felt almost cruel against Ren's tired eyes, sunlight pouring through the tall windows of her chambers, as though the world had no idea anything had changed inside her overnight. She rose before her maids arrived, dressed herself in simple training clothes instead of the fine gowns usually laid out for her, and walked out into the corridors before most of the castle had even finished waking. She had made no final decision yet. That truth sat heavy in her chest as she moved through the halls, nodding politely at guards and servants who greeted her exactly as they always did, as though last night's announcement had changed nothing at all in their eyes. Perhaps to them it hadn't. Perhaps Aluna sharing her title with another queen was simply how things worked in a kingdom built on alliances and bloodlines, and she was the only one foolish enough to expect something different. She found herself at the training fields before she consciously decided to go there, drawn by old habit toward the one place in the castle grounds where her mind had always gone quiet, where the only thing that mattered was footwork and breath and the next movement of a blade. Young warriors were already sparring in loose pairs across the packed dirt, sending up small clouds of dust with every exchange, their laughter carrying easily on the morning air. A boy named Finn, barely 17 and still growing into his own limbs, spotted her first and immediately straightened, his sparring partner forgotten. "My Luna." He bowed his head quickly, clearly caught between excitement and uncertainty about whether he should even be addressing her today. "We didn't expect you this morning." "I needed the air." Ren offered him a small, genuine smile, the first real one she had managed since the throne room. "Would you spar with me? It's been too long since I've had a decent match." Finn's eyes lit up despite himself, and within moments she had a wooden practice blade in her hand, the familiar weight settling her nerves in a way nothing else had managed since last night. She let herself sink fully into the rhythm of it, block and strike and pivot, her body remembering patterns her mind had been too exhausted to hold on to. Finn was good, quick on his feet, improving fast under whatever training regimen the Pack's warriors had assigned him. She could have ended their match within the first few exchanges if she pushed even slightly harder, but instead she let it stretch longer, let him land a solid strike against her shoulder that made the surrounding warriors whoop with approval, let him believe, just for one morning, that he had genuinely earned a win against his queen. "Good work," she told him afterward, meaning it despite the quiet ache still sitting beneath her ribs. "You've improved considerably since the last time we trained together." Finn beamed, practically glowing under the praise, and Ren felt something bittersweet twist inside her chest as she watched him walk away, already eager to tell the others what had happened. These were her people too, in every way that mattered, and whatever choice she eventually made would touch their lives as well, whether they ever fully understood why. She trained for another hour, working through forms with several of the Pack's senior warriors, letting her body carry the weight her mind could not yet fully process. By the time she finally returned to the castle proper, sweat cooling against her skin, the morning had fully given way to afternoon, and the usual rhythms of castle life had resumed around her as though nothing unusual had happened the night before. She passed Isolda Reyes in the eastern corridor near the guest quarters, and the southern princess stopped walking entirely, watching Ren approach with an expression that mixed genuine curiosity with something sharper underneath it. Luna Ren. Isolda's voice carried the polished warmth of someone raised specifically to charm rooms full of strangers. I hoped we might speak properly at some point. I imagine yesterday's announcement came as something of a surprise to you. Ren studied her for a long moment, taking in the careful confidence in Isolde's posture, the way she held herself like someone already certain of her place in this castle, despite having arrived only days ago. It was certainly informative, Ren said evenly, choosing each word with deliberate care. Though I find myself curious how long you've known about this arrangement, given how comfortable you already seem within these walls. Something flickered across Isolda's face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but Ren caught it anyway, a flash of genuine surprise that this quiet, apparently accepting Luna had asked a question with actual teeth behind it. Long enough to prepare myself properly, Isolda said carefully. I understand this cannot be easy for you. I want you to know I have no interest in causing you unnecessary pain. This arrangement serves the kingdom, nothing more. How reassuring. Ren kept her tone light, almost pleasant, though something colder moved beneath the surface of her words. I do hope the kingdom appreciates the sacrifice everyone else seems to be making on its behalf. She walked on before Isolda could formulate a response, feeling the other woman's gaze following her down the corridor, and allowed herself a small private satisfaction at having left the conversation on her own terms rather than the ones apparently expected of her. Dinner that evening was a quiet, formal affair, smaller than the previous night's celebration, attended only by Cade, herself, a handful of senior advisors, and Isolda seated at Cade's other side, as though she had already claimed that position permanently. Ren ate carefully, spoke when spoken to, laughed politely at the appropriate moments, and felt every second of it like performing a role she had memorized so thoroughly that her body could manage it entirely without her mind's full participation. Cade glanced her way several times throughout the meal, an unreadable expression crossing his features each time their eyes met, as though he sensed something had shifted in her without being able to name what it was. Once, near the end of the meal, he reached over and covered her hand briefly with his own, the way he used to do without thinking whenever they sat together, a small habitual gesture from a marriage built on years of easy familiarity. She let him hold her hand for exactly as long as courtesy required, then withdrew it gently to reach for her water glass, and if he noticed anything deliberate in the movement, he said nothing about it. "You seem tired," he said quietly, leaning slightly toward her while Isolde was occupied in conversation with one of the advisors. "Are you well?" "I'm simply adjusting," Ren said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time all evening. "As you asked me to." Something in his expression tightened briefly, guilt perhaps, or discomfort, though it passed too quickly for her to be certain which. "Ren, I know this is difficult. I want you to know that nothing about how I feel toward you has changed." "Of course," she said, and picked up her water glass again, because there was truly nothing else useful to say to a statement that felt, in that moment, entirely disconnected from the reality unfolding around them both. After dinner, she excused herself early, citing exhaustion from her morning training, and nobody questioned it. She walked the long way back to her chambers, taking a route that carried her past the nursery wing, a hallway she rarely visited anymore, though she could not have said exactly why her feet chose that direction tonight. The nursery door was slightly ajar, moonlight spilling faintly through its windows onto an empty crib that had been prepared years ago, back when she and Cade still spoke hopefully about the family they intended to build together, before politics and pack duties slowly crowded that hope into some quiet corner neither of them visited anymore. She stepped inside and crossed to the crib, resting her palm lightly against its polished wooden rail, feeling the familiar smoothness beneath her fingers. This room had waited faithfully for years, hopeful and unused, exactly the way she herself had waited faithfully for a marriage that apparently required far less faith from the person sitting on the throne beside her. She stood there for a long while, memory and grief moving quietly through her chest, without any single sharp edge to grab onto, simply a steady ache that had been building slowly since the moment Cade's voice first echoed through the throne room the night before. Eventually she left the nursery, closing the door softly behind her, and returned to her own chambers, where the folded parchment still waited in the small drawer beside her bed, the old words about severance and blood pressing quietly against her thoughts every time she let her mind grow still enough to notice them. She did not sleep well that night either, though she managed a few restless hours before dawn, dreams tangled with images of the border shrine and old carved stone, and a version of herself walking away from the castle without ever once looking back. The days that followed blurred together in a careful, deliberate rhythm she built for herself, part performance and part genuine preparation, though only Raina knew which parts belonged to which category. She trained each morning, spoke politely with Isolda whenever their paths crossed, sat beside Cade during meals and pack gatherings, and allowed the castle to believe entirely that its Luna had accepted her new circumstances with the grace everyone expected of her. Quietly, in the hours nobody watched closely, she prepared instead for something else entirely. Raina helped her gather what she would need, small practical things easily overlooked amid the greater dramas of the castle. Warm traveling clothes, hidden at the bottom of an old trunk, coin carefully saved over years of modest personal spending, a map of the southern roads borrowed briefly from the castle archives and copied by candlelight before being quietly returned. "You're certain," Raina said one evening, watching Ren fold the last of her traveling supplies into a worn leather bag. "Once you do this, there's no going back. You understand that?" "I understood that the moment I read the old text," Ren said quietly, smoothing the fabric with careful hands. "I've had days now to think it over from every possible angle, and I keep arriving at the same conclusion. I cannot spend the rest of my life as a queen who exists only to be tolerated." "And Cade?" Raina asked, her voice gentler now. "Have you spoken to him honestly, even once, about any of this? Does he know how deeply this has actually hurt you?" Ren was quiet for a long moment, considering the question honestly rather than brushing it aside. "I've tried, in small ways, to let him see it. He notices something has shifted, I think, but he's too occupied with securing this alliance to look closely enough to understand what it actually is. Perhaps if I confronted him directly, argued, demanded he reconsider, something might change, but I no longer believe I should have to convince someone to choose me properly. Either he already would have, or he wouldn't, no matter how loudly I argued my case." Raina nodded slowly, understanding settling into her expression even as sadness lingered close behind it. "Then I'll help you finish preparing. When will you go?" Ren looked toward her window, where the moon hung low and pale over the sleeping castle grounds, the border forest beyond just barely visible in the distance, patient and waiting exactly as it had waited for centuries. "Soon," she said quietly, "very soon. I only need to choose the right night, one where nobody will notice I'm missing until it's already far too late to follow." Raina reached over and squeezed her hand, and neither of them spoke again for a long while, the weight of everything ahead settling quietly between them in the dim candlelight of Ren's chambers. Outside, the kingdom continued exactly as it always had, unaware that its Luna had already begun walking, quietly and deliberately, toward a threshold from which there would be no returning. The night she finally chose arrived quietly, without any particular signal to mark it as different from the ones before it, except that Ren woke that morning already certain, in the deep, steady way certainty settles once all the doubt has finally burned itself out. Isolda's formal welcoming feast was scheduled for that evening, a grander affair than the small dinners they had shared over recent days, meant to properly introduce the southern princess to the full pack as its future second queen. Every senior warrior, every elder, every notable family within the kingdom would be gathered in the great hall, attention fixed entirely on Isolda and the ceremony surrounding her arrival. It was, Ren realized as she dressed that morning, the perfect night for nobody to notice her absence until it was already too late. She spent the day exactly as she had spent every day that week, training briefly at dawn, exchanging polite words with servants and advisors, sitting through preparations for the evening's feast with an expression of calm cooperation that fooled everyone who observed her. Only Raina knew what truly moved beneath that careful surface, and even she had been sworn to complete silence about the details, for her own protection as much as Ren's. "If anyone asks why I helped you," Raina had said the night before, "I want to honestly say I knew nothing specific, just that you seemed unwell and needed rest." "That's not far from the truth," Ren had answered, managing a small, tired smile. By evening, the great hall had filled with warmth and noise, and the bright, confident presence of Isolda Reyes standing at its center, accepting compliments and introductions with practiced grace. Cade stood beside her for most of the ceremony, playing his role as host and king with the same easy authority he brought to everything, and if he noticed Ren's absence from her usual seat near the front, the demands of the evening apparently kept him from investigating too closely. Ren had excused herself early, citing a headache, a small kindness Cade granted without much thought, distracted as he was by the evening's larger purpose. She kissed his cheek before leaving, a gesture so ordinary that neither of them paused to consider it might be the last one they ever shared, and walked calmly from the great hall while celebration continued unbothered behind her. Her chambers, when she reached them, felt different already, quieter somehow, as though the room itself understood what was coming. She changed quickly into the simple traveling clothes Raina had helped her hide away, plain and warm and entirely unlike anything a Luna would normally wear, and packed the last few remaining items into her worn leather bag with steady, careful hands. Before leaving, she paused at her dressing table, where her wedding cuff sat gleaming faintly in the candlelight, heavy gold engraved with Cade's name pressed deep into the metal, a piece she had worn every single day for 3 years, without ever once being asked whether its weight actually suited her. She lifted it slowly, turning it over in her palm, remembering the day he had placed it there himself, remembering how certain she had felt back then that everything ahead of them would only grow stronger with time. That certainty felt impossibly distant now, a memory belonging to someone she barely recognized anymore. She set the cuff down gently on her pillow, smoothing the fabric beneath it with careful fingers, and left her chambers without looking back. Raina waited for her near the servants' entrance at the castle's northern wall, exactly as planned, a small satchel of additional supplies already prepared and waiting beside her. "The feast will run late," Raina said quietly, handing over the satchel. "Nobody will notice you're missing until morning at the very earliest. That should give you enough time." "Thank you." Ren embraced her friend tightly, feeling the weight of everything they had shared together settle briefly between them. A lifetime of loyalty compressed into one final, quiet moment. "For everything. I mean that. Be careful." Raina's voice caught slightly, though she held herself steady. "Whatever happens after tonight, wherever you end up, please find some way to let me know you're safe. I don't need details, just enough to know you're alive. I promise." Ren pulled back, meeting her friend's eyes one final time. "Take care of yourself, Raina, and thank you for never once making me feel foolish for choosing this." Raina simply nodded, unable to trust her voice any further, and Ren slipped quietly through the servants' entrance into the cool night air beyond the castle walls. The journey to the border shrine took nearly 2 hours on foot, moving carefully through familiar forest paths she had walked many times before during happier days, though tonight every shadow felt sharper, every sound louder, her senses heightened by the enormity of what waited ahead. She moved quickly but carefully, avoiding the main roads where a lone traveler might draw unwanted attention, keeping instead to older trails known mostly to hunters and pack scouts. The shrine itself sat in a small clearing near the kingdom's southern border, a place few people visited anymore, except during certain traditional ceremonies, marked by a single large standing stone carved centuries ago with the image of a wolf mid-stride, muscles captured in careful, ancient detail by hands long since turned to dust. Ren approached the stone slowly, her heartbeat steady despite the enormity of the moment pressing down around her. Moonlight fell across the clearing in soft silver patches, illuminating the old carved wolf just enough for her to make out its features clearly, worn smooth in places by centuries of weather and reverent hands. She knelt before the stone, setting her bag aside, and drew the small blade she had carried specifically for this purpose, its edge sharpened carefully that afternoon, while nobody watched closely enough to question why. The old text had been specific about the words required, ancient phrases in a language mostly forgotten now except among scholars and the oldest pack elders, though Ren had memorized them carefully over the preceding days, repeating them quietly to herself until they settled naturally onto her tongue. She pressed her palm against the cool stone surface of the carved wolf, drew the blade lightly across her palm, and spoke the old words clearly into the quiet night air, her voice steady despite everything trembling beneath it. For a moment, nothing happened at all, and a cold spike of doubt shot through her chest, fear that perhaps the old text had been wrong, or incomplete, or simply too ancient to still hold any real power in a modern world that had largely forgotten such things. Then the bond broke. It did not happen loudly. There was no flash of light, no dramatic surge of energy visible to any onlooker who might have witnessed the moment. Instead, Ren felt something deep inside her chest simply release, a tension she had carried so long and so constantly that she had stopped noticing its weight, suddenly gone entirely, like a held breath finally allowed to leave the body after being trapped there for years. Where 3 years of Cade's presence had lived quietly inside her, a warmth she had grown so accustomed to that she rarely noticed it consciously anymore, there was now simply nothing. Not pain, not emptiness exactly, just a clean, quiet absence where connection used to be. She knelt there for a long moment afterward, breathing carefully, waiting to see if regret would follow the relief she currently felt, waiting to discover whether some part of her wanted desperately to call the bond back into existence now that it was truly gone. It did not come. Instead, she felt strangely lighter, as though she had set down a burden so familiar she had forgotten it was even possible to walk without carrying it. Miles away, inside the castle, Cade Ashford woke suddenly from a restless sleep, reaching instinctively across the bed for a warmth that had occupied that space every single night for 3 years, and finding instead only cold, empty sheets where his mate should have been. He sat up sharply, an unfamiliar hollowness spreading through his chest, a sensation he had never experienced before in his entire life, as though something essential had simply been removed from him without warning or explanation. His wolf, usually a steady, confident presence beneath his human awareness, suddenly felt strangely quiet, almost absent, in a way that sent immediate alarm racing through his body. He called for Ren's name into the darkness of their chambers, though some instinctive part of him already suspected, even before receiving any answer, that calling would accomplish nothing at all. The chambers remained silent. Only the candlelight flickering softly against empty walls answered him, and when he rose and crossed to her side of the bed, he found the wedding cuff resting neatly on her pillow, gold catching the low light in a way that felt suddenly, terribly final. He lifted it slowly, turning it over in his hands, and felt, for the first time since making his announcement in the throne room, the true weight of exactly what he had done and exactly what it had apparently cost him. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, moving quietly through the forest, toward roads that led far from everything she had ever known, Ren Calder walked steadily forward without looking back, carrying nothing of her old life except the clothes on her back, a small bag of practical supplies, and a strange, unfamiliar lightness settling slowly into the empty space where a bond used to live. Dawn was still hours away, but by the time its light finally reached the castle, everyone within its walls would understand, in their own separate and painful ways, exactly what silence could cost a kingdom that had grown too comfortable, assuming its Luna would always simply endure. The castle woke that morning to chaos it had not experienced in years, guards moving urgently through every corridor, Beta Raina Voss standing at the center of it all giving careful, measured answers that revealed nothing while appearing entirely cooperative. Cade himself led the search personally, moving through every wing of the castle with an intensity his advisors had rarely witnessed from him, as though sheer determination alone might somehow reverse whatever had happened during the night. By midday, word had reached the border patrols, and by evening, scouts confirmed what Cade had already begun to suspect from the moment he first held that empty gold cuff in his shaking hands. His bond with Ren was gone entirely, severed completely, a fact his own body confirmed constantly through the strange hollow absence now settled permanently beneath his ribs where her presence used to live. Isolda Reyes, to her credit, seemed genuinely unsettled by the sudden disappearance, though whatever guilt she felt did nothing to soften the political disaster now unfolding around her. Word traveled quickly among the southern packs that Cade Ashford's original Luna had vanished entirely, rather than accept a second queen, and rather than viewing this as clearing the way for Isolda's ascension, the Reyes family took it instead as a troubling sign about the stability of any alliance built on such shaky ground. "They're asking difficult questions," Isolda told Cade 1 week later, her earlier confidence considerably diminished. "My father wants assurance that whatever drove your first Luna away won't eventually drive me away as well. He's beginning to wonder whether this arrangement was wise at all." Cade said nothing useful in response, because he had no honest answer that would satisfy either of them. The truth, increasingly clear to him with every passing day, was that he had made a decision affecting his entire marriage without ever properly consulting the person most affected by it, and no amount of political explanation could fully justify that failure now that its consequences had become so painfully visible. He searched for Ren for months, sending scouts along every southern road, questioning travelers and merchants who might have crossed paths with a lone woman matching her description, following every rumor that reached the castle regardless of how thin or unlikely it seemed. Raina, when pressed directly, maintained steadily that she knew nothing beyond Ren's general unhappiness in the days before her disappearance, a claim Cade suspected was not entirely truthful but could never quite prove otherwise. The alliance with the Reyes pack collapsed formally within 3 months, the southern family withdrawing their support entirely once it became clear that Cade's kingdom faced growing unrest among its own people, many of whom had genuinely loved their vanished Luna and viewed her disappearance as evidence of some deeper failure in their king's judgment. Isolda returned home without ceremony, her ambitions for the northern throne quietly abandoned, and Cade found himself facing exactly the kind of political vulnerability his original announcement had been meant to prevent. He grew quieter over those months, his advisors noticed, less certain in council meetings, more prone to long silences during discussions that once would have commanded his immediate, confident attention. His wolf remained strangely subdued as well, as though some essential part of him had genuinely gone missing alongside his departed mate, leaving behind only a diminished version of the king he had been before. It was Raina, eventually, who finally gave him something real to follow, though she waited until she was entirely certain Ren had established herself safely somewhere far beyond easy pursuit before doing so. "She's not in danger," Raina told him quietly one evening, nearly 6 months after the disappearance, finding him alone in his study, surrounded by maps he had stopped actually studying weeks earlier. "I received word recently. She's safe, and she's built something for herself. I won't tell you where, not directly, because that choice belongs to her, and not to either of us. But I think you deserve to know she's alive and well, at least." Raina. His voice cracked slightly on her name, raw in a way he rarely allowed himself to be in front of anyone. "Please, I need to see her, even once, even if she sends me away again immediately afterward." Raina studied him for a long moment, weighing something carefully behind her eyes. "I'll tell you this much. There's a village 3 days south of the old border shrine, past the Reyes territory entirely, where a healer has become quite well known recently for her skill with wounds and fevers. I won't say more than that. What you do with the information is entirely your own choice, and whatever happens when you find her, if you find her, is between the two of you alone. He left that same night, traveling alone rather than with any formal escort, understanding instinctively that whatever conversation waited for him at the end of this journey required none of the ceremony or authority he usually carried as king. He was simply a man now, searching for someone he had failed badly enough that she had chosen to erase every trace of their bond rather than continue living inside its broken shape. The journey took nearly 4 days rather than 3, delayed by weather and difficult terrain, and by the time he finally reached the small village Raina had described, exhaustion had worn away most of his remaining confidence, leaving only quiet determination and a fear he had rarely experienced in his entire life as king. He found her exactly where instinct led him, in a modest healer's tent near the village center, its canvas walls marked with simple symbols indicating medical care within. He stood outside for a long moment before entering, gathering whatever courage remained to him, then finally stepped through the tent flap into dim, herb-scented light. Ren was bent over a low table, her hands steady and sure as she wrapped a bandage around a young boy's injured arm, speaking softly and reassuringly to him throughout the process. She looked different than he remembered, hair shorter, practical clothes replacing the fine gowns she used to wear, but something in her posture had also changed in a way he found harder to name, a settled confidence that seemed to come from somewhere entirely her own, rather than borrowed from any title or position. She looked up before he spoke, some old instinct alerting her to his presence even before her eyes confirmed it, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, the boy on the table glancing curiously between them, sensing tension without understanding its source. "That's healed well," Ren finally told the boy gently, finishing the bandage with practiced efficiency. "Come back in 3 days, and I'll check it again. Tell your mother the fever medicine should be finished by tomorrow evening." The boy nodded and slipped quietly from the tent, leaving Ren and Cade alone in the dim herb-scented light, the weight of 6 months and one severed bond pressing heavily into the silence between them. "You found me," Ren said eventually, her voice steady in a way that surprised him. No trace of the careful, controlled calm she used to perform back in the castle, just genuine composure earned through actual peace rather than practiced restraint. "Raina gave me a village, nothing more." Cade's voice came out rougher than he intended, emotion pressing hard against his careful control. "I had to see you, even if you send me away the moment I finish saying that." "I'm not sending you away." Ren set aside her healing supplies carefully, studying him with an expression he could not quite read, something between curiosity and old faded pain. "Though I imagine you didn't travel 4 days simply to be told that. I came because I needed to understand what I actually broke." He stepped further into the tent, close enough now to see clearly how genuinely well she looked, how different from the careful, contained woman he remembered from the throne room that terrible night. The bond severed completely. "I felt it happen. I've felt its absence every single day since, and I finally understood, far too late, exactly what I asked of you that night. You asked me to share my life and my title with someone else, without ever once asking whether I wanted to." Ren's voice remained calm, though something firmer moved beneath it now. "You could have said no to that alliance for my sake. You chose the kingdom instead, and you did it without giving me any real voice in the decision. I know." He held her gaze steadily, refusing to look away from the truth she was placing directly in front of him. "I've had 6 months to understand exactly how badly I failed you, and I won't insult you now by pretending otherwise, or asking you to simply forgive it because I've finally noticed the damage." Something shifted slightly in Ren's expression, surprise perhaps, at hearing him take genuine responsibility rather than offering excuses about politics and alliance and necessity. "You said it," she said quietly. "I did leave. I did it because staying silent felt like disappearing, and I chose not to disappear. But I never said you could not come find me, once you finally understood why I left in the first place. Then let me ask properly this time. Cade's voice softened, uncertainty replacing the desperate urgency he had carried through 4 days of hard travel. Not as your king demanding your return, just as a man who finally understands what he lost, asking whether there's anything left here worth rebuilding, however slowly, however carefully, entirely on your terms this time rather than mine. Ren studied him for a long, quiet moment, the herb-scented tent holding still around them both, the weight of everything unresolved between them settling gently rather than crushing either one of them beneath it. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, and there was no cruelty in the words, only genuine truth. "I've built something real here, something entirely my own, and I'm not willing to simply abandon it because you've finally arrived to ask. But I'm also not willing to pretend the last 3 years meant nothing, or that I never loved you at all, because that wouldn't be honest either." "Then tell me what you need," Cade said quietly. "Whatever it is, I'll wait as long as necessary, and I'll ask nothing of you that you're not ready to give." Rin considered him carefully, something cautious, but not entirely closed moving behind her eyes. "Stay in the village for a while, if you're genuinely willing, not as a king demanding answers, just as yourself, learning who I've actually become, rather than assuming you already know. If something real still exists between us after that, we'll find it honestly, together. If it doesn't, you'll leave knowing you finally gave me the choice you took from me before." Cade nodded slowly, understanding settling into him with a quiet, unfamiliar humility. "I can do that." Outside the tent, the small village continued its ordinary afternoon rhythms, unaware that a kingdom's future had just quietly shifted direction inside a humble healer's tent, built now not on politics or alliance, but on something far more fragile and far more honest than either of them had allowed their bond to be before. Whatever came next remained genuinely uncertain, neither guaranteed reconciliation nor inevitable ending, but for the first time in longer than either of them could clearly remember, the choice belonged entirely and equally to both of them.